My name is Annie. I'm sitting in my office in Austin, the hum of keyboards and the shuffle of papers filling the air. It's a far cry from the cold porch where I once waited, hoping for someone to remember me. But even now, surrounded by success and a team that believes in my mission, the past still haunts me. Just a few weeks ago, I received a cream-colored envelope from a law firm in Cedar Rapids. Inside was a letter from my parents, through their counsel, requesting that I help pay for my younger brother's college tuition. They framed it as an act of family responsibility, citing the years they raised and supported me. The words were so clean on paper, so absolute, as if the pain and abandonment I endured had never happened. Before I could fully process the shock, an email from my uncle arrived, urging me to fulfill my family duty. I was furious. I printed the letter and the email, placed them side by side on my desk, and wrote a note in thick black marker: "My silence is not an agreement, it's a boundary." I locked them away, but I knew the past wasn't finished testing me. Then, a package arrived. It was an ordinary cardboard box with no return address. Inside was a VHS tape wrapped in a brittle plastic grocery bag, along with a scribbled note saying, "Found this in storage. Thought it might be yours." I borrowed a converter from the IT guy and played the tape. There I was, a 12-year-old girl, standing on a porch with my backpack and my stuffed bear, Teddy, poking out of the zipper. I heard my father's voice say, "You don't live here anymore," and then the sound of a car door slamming and tires crunching on gravel. That night, I gathered all the evidence of my parents' betrayal, the bank statements with their signatures, the legal demand letter, and my uncle's email. I filmed a short statement at my desk. I spoke calmly, saying, "This isn't revenge. This is recording for every child told they were the problem. For every kid, erased from their own family's story." I posted the video along with the digitized clip, and within 24 hours, it had been shared millions of times. But let me go back to the beginning. I grew up in a small town. My parents, Sarah and David, were a volatile couple. My mother was quick-tempered and often lashed out, while my father was cold and distant. They always seemed to be on the verge of a fight, and I was constantly walking on eggshells. One afternoon, the wind was howling against the old windows of our house. I was sitting in the corner of the living room, coloring with Teddy by my side, trying to stay quiet. I could hear my parents arguing in the kitchen. At first, it was just raised voices, but then I heard my name. "She's a curse," my mother snapped. "Everything went wrong after she was born." My father replied, "Our business failed, and we lost the chance for a second child. We were fine before she came." I froze, my crayon still pressed to the paper. I had always known our house was full of tension, but I never expected to hear such cruel words. The fight ended in silence, and then my mother stepped into the hallway and said, "Go pack a bag." I thought we were going to visit someone, maybe a family friend. I asked how long we'd be gone, but she didn't answer. In my room, I folded my favorite clothes and carefully placed Teddy in the corner of my backpack. I was embarrassed to bring him, but I couldn't bear to leave him behind. The drive was silent. My mother didn't look at me or say a word. When we pulled up in front of my grandparents' house, she left the engine running and said, "Get out." I hesitated, waiting for her to smile or tell me it was a joke. But she just sat there, her hands white on the steering wheel. I opened the door and got out, the door closing behind me with a finality that made my heart sink. Before I could turn around, the car was already driving away. I rang the doorbell, my stomach in knots. My grandfather, Henry, opened the door a crack. "Annie, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice full of weariness. "Mom dropped me off," I whispered. He looked down the street, the taillights disappearing, and sighed. "We can't go against your parents, honey," he said, handing me a folded blanket and then closing the door. I stood on the porch as the sun set, the cold air seeping through my clothes. I wrapped the blanket around me and watched the windows, hoping someone would open the door and let me in. But hours passed, and nothing happened. Then, I heard a voice across the street. Annie, it was Mrs. Thompson, my grandparents' neighbor. She hurried over, her shawl slipping off one shoulder. She didn't ask questions, just took me into her warm house. The smell of cinnamon and old books filled the air. She wrapped me in one of her husband's sweaters and gave me a cup of tea. I sat on her couch, looking out at my grandparents' house. The windows were dark, and there was no sign of life. I kept waiting for my parents to come and get me, but the night grew darker, and the silence became overwhelming. Mrs. Thompson's spare room became my home. She cleared space in the dresser for my clothes and put Teddy on the pillow. Life with her was peaceful, but the absence of my family was always there. At school, during spelling bees, art shows, and choir concerts, I would look at the empty chair where my parents should have been. Teachers would scan the crowd, hoping to see someone, but they always gave up. I still wrote letters to my parents. Hi, Mom. I got an A on my math test, or Dad, I miss you. I added stickers and drew hearts on the envelopes and put them in Mrs. Thompson's mailbox, imagining them reaching my parents and making them remember me. One day after school, Mrs. Thompson called me into the kitchen. She had a stack of envelopes in her hands, all with my handwriting. These came back, she said softly. All of them, returned to sender. I reached for them, my hands shaking. The stamps were smudged, and the corners were bent. She told me my parents didn't live there anymore, and they hadn't for a while. That night, I laid the envelopes on my bed, feeling like I had lost a battle. When I was 16, Mrs. Thompson trusted me with her Saturday cleaning. While sorting through boxes in her kitchen, I found a faded cardboard box marked miscellaneous. Inside were old recipes and church bulletins, and at the bottom, a thick manila envelope with my name written in my grandmother's cursive. I opened it and found a bank statement from the year I was born. There was a savings account in my name, opened with $500. Over the years, with birthday and Christmas deposits, the balance had grown to $15,000. But the last page showed a zero balance. The withdrawal was made 2 weeks after my mother left me on the porch. There were 2 signatures at the bottom, my parents'. I was filled with rage. They hadn't just left me, they had stolen my future. Mrs. Thompson saw my face and touched my shoulder but said nothing. She knew that sometimes, silence was the kindest thing. That night, I took out an old drawing I had made of a family holding hands. I smoothed it out and then redrew it. This time, it was just me and Mrs. Thompson. At the bottom, I wrote "Start here." Not long after, I walked to a local diner and asked for a job. I was still a year under the legal working age, but the manager looked at me and saw the determination in my eyes. He gave me a chance. I started bussing tables, and later, I added more jobs. I worked long hours, but each paycheck was a step towards independence. Between shifts, I spent time at the library. I learned coding and design, and I filled notebooks with ideas. One day, I wrote "New Horizons" at the top of a page. I wanted to create a resource for kids like me, who had no one to guide them through life's challenges. By the time I was 20, New Horizons had become a real website. It was basic at first, but it caught on. Foster kids, students without family support, and others started finding it and leaving comments about how it helped them. A local journalist wanted to do a feature on my website. I almost said no, but Mrs. Thompson encouraged me. "Sometimes the quietest builders deserve to be seen," she said. So I agreed. The article was titled "The Founder Who Built Herself from Nothing." It was a source of pride, but it also made me realize that I had come a long way. Then, more articles followed, and my inbox filled with messages and opportunities. But I didn't let the outside noise change me. I still worked hard, still saved my money, and still remembered where I came from. After that, I faced the events that brought me back to the present. The legal demand, the VHS tape, and the public sharing of my story. And then, there was my younger brother's birthday banquet. I received an ornate invitation, but there was no apology, no acknowledgement of the years of pain. I decided to go, not out of nostalgia, but to show that I was stronger than the past. At the banquet, I was placed at an overflow table in the corner. There were no flowers, no centerpiece. I sat alone as the room was filled with laughter and celebration. My father stood up and thanked the guests, never once looking in my direction. I wrote on the back of the overflow card, "This table was never mine," and then I left. In the courtroom, the judge's words were clear: "She owes you nothing." My parents sat there, their shoulders stiff. I didn't look at them. I just felt the weight lift off my shoulders. Days later, outside my office, my mother approached me. "You'll always be my daughter," she said, her voice cracking. I raised my hand to stop her and stepped back. My father stood a few feet behind, his arms crossed. I turned and walked inside, leaving the past behind. Weeks later, my cousin, Lily, called me. She was crying, saying that her mother had started calling her baby a curse after some hard times. I told her what no one had told me at her age, that a child is never to blame for misfortune, and that curses aren't real, but the scars they leave are. She listened, and for the first time, I felt like I could break the cycle. Not long after, Mrs. Thompson moved in with me. Her books lined the shelves, and her slippers were under the bed. Above the dresser hung the drawing I had redrawn at 16, of a girl walking towards an open door. One evening, I returned from a youth event, my speech still ringing in my ears. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and paused at the threshold. The door was mine now, wide open, and I knew that my life was no longer defined by the family that had abandoned me. It was defined by the new family I had created, by the work I was doing, and by the hope for a better future.